you start to realize like, whoa, as an operator, what was my hourly rate for that deal? It's like 20,000 an hour or 10 to 20 grand an hour. Yeah. That's insanity. So then you start to look around you and you just see the world differently, like the world of finance. It's a real paradigm shift. You can look at someone that's behind you and that can inflate you. You can look at someone that's ahead of you and that can shrink you. Right. Instead, you need to just realize that you are where you are and you were somewhere else a year ago. And I think that's really the remedy. You already brought it up, but that's really the remedy.
Hey, welcome to the King Show, everybody. I've got with me today a Land Boss one-on-one coaching alumni, star student, I don't know, rookie of the year, maybe in the runnings.
I don't know about that.
We got Jon Newth with me. Hey, Jon, welcome to the show.
Travis, thanks for having me, man. I'm stoked to be here with you.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you and to tell your story. And I think that a lot of people are going to appreciate it because it's fun for me. I recall doing your discovery call when you kind of reached out to coaching. How long ago was that at this point?
Gosh, it was 2023. I think I was reaching out to people. I talked to only a couple people, and I want to say it was June or July. Probably not. Yeah, May or June. Actually, it was earlier than that because I was talking to Buck by July. So yeah, May or June.
I felt like we weren't at 2 years yet, somewhere around a year and a half or something. It's almost like that feeling of like going on the discovery call. I go, okay, I want to talk to this guy 1 year from now. You know what I mean? That year check-in, see where things are at. So I remember doing the discovery call when you were looking into one-on-one coaching. And I'll share this with people because this is why I don't want to spoil people and tell them how successful you are. But during the discovery call, when I started asking you, hey, what would make this look like a success? And, where do you want to be at? Some of your answers told me right away that, all right, this is somebody that wants to build a business, not make a quick buck flipping a couple properties. When you started telling me about, hey, I want to be here by year 3, and then by year 5, I want to be here, and then step out of the W-2, you had a really well thought out plan, and you had, when I say like realistic expectations, I don't, like numbers wise, I just mean like you understood you were building a business you step into, not something you're going to get in and spend $1,000 on marketing and make $1 million, right? Like you really thought through building this thing out. And I could tell right away, like, hey, this guy's going to be successful as long as he's willing to follow the plan, which I'm guessing he is. You had a really kind of a business owner mindset. For being a W-2 employee, you kind of approached it as somebody who understood what it took to build a business. Just bring me back to kind of that conversation and where your head was at that time.
Yeah, no, this is going to be fun to revisit this because it feels like a different lifetime because I feel like we're really on to chapter 2 now. And that was like before chapter 1. But yeah, so we actually, a little backstory there. And some people might've heard a little bit of this if you listen to the Ari Tipster episode, but right before that, early 2023, my wife and I went on a trip to Europe. It was a baby moon for our second baby. So our first kid, we got two young boys. Right now they're 4 and 1. Or not quite, 3.5 and 1. But who's keeping track?
Wait till you have 4. Wait till you have 4 and you got to say.
I don't know. Maybe not in the Newth household. We started late. So I tell my wife all the time, it's not one of my life goals to be changing diapers till I'm 40. And I'm only about 4 years away from that. So we were going to go on a baby moon, or did go on a baby moon for our second baby. The oldest one was old enough to leave behind. And we didn't have the second baby yet. So we snuck in a trip to Europe. And it was, I don't know what it was about, probably that I took some time away from like the busyness of life. Yeah. And just the what?
The salt mines, I said. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we had some time away and my mind was sort of clear. And I spent a lot of time on these tours and sightseeing and processing. And for whatever reason, I told my wife, like, when we get home, I'm going to start the land business. I had tinkered with it a little bit a couple of years before, sent some postcards. I never really followed through, didn't have a solid plan. Yeah. I didn't find success. It was user error, though. I've sort of self-identified why. But, I kept listening to things in land. I was always back and forth into the podcast and this and that. And I said, when we get home, starting a land business. And my wife, Samantha, she was on board. She had listened to a lot of Seth and, Jaron and Drew. She had heard you. She already knew who you were before we started that call. And, just from driving around. So she understood the concept. She was on board. Yeah. And she's like, yeah, we really do need to look into that. And so I got home, I booked a call with you. And we had, I think the reason that I had so many goals like laid out was because I had too much time to think about it. So I don't know how many people like hear these shows, and then binge them and jump right in. I know I did my first sort of attempt with it, and then I put it on the back burner because I was busy at my W-2. I'm a fireman by trade. I'm also a paramedic, and so that means that we are always short staffed on guys like me. And so they constant, whether we wanted to or not, it was like, hey,
overtime, whether you want it or not. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Mandatories, forced overtime, we call them. So I was distracted. I thought I was making incredible money. I mean, it was my first like real big boy career job, and it was more money than we'd ever made. And so, talk about mindsets and perspectives, I just thought that we were crushing it. And that's probably a good place to be, just comfortable with what you're making and living within your means. It certainly doesn't motivate you though to step outside and scratch that entrepreneurial itch if you have it. And so I had it. It wasn't enough to push me out, to pursue it. But something about being in Europe, I wanted to pursue this. It was something I had thought about for a long time. And so I had a lot of time to think about like, what do the numbers mean? I have a family now. We've got bills. We had a mortgage for the first time ever, for a couple of years. And so to me, it was the numbers initially, like, is this going to be worth it? And I had to decide what would make it worth it. And man, I think that the goal that I told you was like, I just wanted to replace my overtime because I didn't know where to start. Like, do I say I want to make $500,000? That didn't seem achievable. I had listened to a lot of stuff about Desert Squares and then found Land Boss, your method, and thought, well, this really resonates. I'd rather do less deals for more money. Like, who wouldn't? Yeah. And so I just thought, well, I don't know, 50 grand still sounds like a lot, but it'd be more than I was making in overtime.
Right.
And so that would be worth it, And so I think if I remember right, that was the first number I gave you. It was like, if we could do 50 grand in the first year.
I would just like to replace my overtime, and then you're like, okay, and then by year 2, right, I would like to be at like 3x that, right? And then you're kind of like by year 3, so you kind of understood that it's kind of exponential, right? Like that growth, that like year 1 is expensive, like we're getting started, we have all the expenses, it's inertia, we're getting the flywheel trying to turn, but like us talking together was like, by year 2 though, right, like you're faster, you're more proficient, right, you know how to do things, you're more mindful like of your marketing dollars and how to use them and everything, and you have some historical like data to look behind at, right, and going forward. So I knew like going to that call, you're like, okay, like I want to build on this, but it's when people go year 1, they go, I want to make 500,000, and I go, all right, what do we got to spend on marketing? And they're like, I got $1,500, right? You go, okay, there's a disconnect. You know what I mean? Like there's a disconnect here to like almost any number is achievable if you have the marketing budget and you can operationally process the leads, right? But I think in that conversation, it was not like, save me, Travis, I'm miserable in my job, I need to be out of this thing in 3 months. It was very methodical. You were like, hey, like what I do, get lots of overtime, but it's not necessarily optional, but would love to kind of build this in parallel on the side, and then I have options.
Something you said just reminded me that one of the reasons that I decided in Europe that I was going to call you was we had 45,000 in a savings account because of being forced to work overtime. We had one kid. We keep our bills low. At the time, I think I was driving an old 94 F-150, which I loved. I never should have sold it, but it cost me like $2,000 to buy it. So we kept our bills so low, and I had this stockpile of cash, and I was thinking about new cars. I was thinking about, do we move? Do we do an addition on the house? Then I remembered land. So that's what it was, is I told my wife, I've got a runway to start something. Let's put it aside before we do anything with it. And then I got to start, kicking the can down the road again. So that was a big part of it too.
Yeah. And that's great because that's just it. So I tell a story a couple of different ways, but I've got like a pool property, I call it, where we wanted to put a pool in, right? And I go, all right, what's the pool cost? You know what I mean? How much do I have to pay for the pool? And then go, okay, do they finance the pool? What's the interest rate, right? If I don't want to spend all that money on a pool. And then instead of going, all right, I'm going to go buy the pool. And this is the same way as the car, right? The Tahoe payment, same way. I don't just go to the dealer and get the Tahoe and start making the payment. I'm not going to use all my money and tie up all that cash on a car, right? But for me, I go, okay, what property can I buy at under market value, turn around and resell it with a higher interest rate, get that payment, right? And we did that like with a pool, right? Where we have a property that we captured equity on, we subdivided it, and then to the child parcels we sold off, and the payments, that's the pool, right? You know what I mean? So like those payments from that piece of land,
we'll cover,
right? We'll cover that. And we've done the same thing with cars. So kind of like you're saying, to the biggest mistake you can make is when you've got that saved to just run out and buy the vehicle, right? Because it's not a one-step process. It's almost like a two-step process. If you could go now buy a property and then resell it, at a high interest rate and collect payments, you can turn around, and make that vehicle payment, right? But so many people would make that decision to get that vehicle because that straight line's the easiest for them, but it's really like turning a one-step thing into a two-step is kind of how we've been able to, essentially like leverage cheaper money, right? And have somebody else make our payments for us versus tying up all of our own capital. But yeah, that's I think having that little seed money, right, that you have is what a lot of people, they have the motivation, maybe some desperation, like you're excited, but like, you might be setting yourself up for failure if you don't have some seed money like you did for you to afford coaching and marketing, right? Like year one. So I think that's key is you understood, hey, I need some runway. So that's important. I think that's a great spot to be in. That's almost like, okay, I've got my, my marketing covered my first 6 months or maybe even year.
Well, I just want to add something before we move on. You said considering things like the coaching, and I looked at that 45,000 and I thought, so let's say we carve some out for coaching, right? And I thought maybe that number goes down a bit. Okay, so let's say it goes down to half for easy math. So we've got somewhere around 25,000 to spend on the business. But having that 25,000 with coaching, to me, I was thinking about my learning curve because I've started a lot of things in life. I spent my whole 20s sort of floundering and going from one thing to the next and trying to figure out what it is that I really wanted to do. I didn't know that I ever wanted to be an entrepreneur or create my own thing. And I feel like I'm finally on the right track here, but spent my 20s just starting things over, one thing after thing. And so unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not sure which, I understood the concept of learning curves and how they flatten over time or they get steeper when you take on something new. But I thought 20 to 30 grand with coaching is like having $100,000 runway is the way I thought of it. 45,000 without coaching is like having 45,000 and I'm probably going to spend it really quickly. I'm going to make mistakes. So, going back to what you're saying about the Tahoe payment, well, I'm going to think about that in from the angle of, well, how do I create value that feeds this expense that I'm going to have? You're thinking like an entrepreneur. You understand how money works. How do I leverage? You say it. I learned this from you. Little hinges swing big doors. Yeah. What little thing can I do before I make this decision that makes this easier to bear? And so I think I looked at that 45,000 and I had heard so many people come on these shows and talk about, how quickly they found success and how well land worked. And to me, I just thought, I knew I was serious about doing it. I knew I wasn't going to get in, try to make a quick buck and get out. I wanted to stick around. And so I wanted that money, that runway money, that seed money, to have as much value as possible. And the way I saw it was the ingredient to that was finding someone who was 5 years ahead of me and would sort of lead me along. They would put the bumpers up. They would help me avoid big mistakes. They would help me make sure that I was doing things that probably other new investors weren't doing. And I figured that if I had those two things added to my arsenal, then I didn't need to have 100,000. I could probably do it on 20 to 30 because I was going to get the most out of every penny that I was going to spend.
No, what I tell people is that kind of like 3 things you should get out of coaching. And this isn't just like coaching and real estate investing, right? If I do coaching with a marketing consultant, right? Or you do consulting with anybody else, business coach or something, it's like what I've identified when I get coaching is like, I want to avoid costly landmines. I want to accelerate success. And then hopefully I want kind of access to my coach's contacts or folio, their network, right? So those are kind of like 3. Some people, they just go, all you think when you start out coaching, this is how because I didn't know any better. You just go, I just want the tactical. Teach me the tactical of what you know, right? But you don't understand that. And those are the 3 things I'd tell people, regardless of who you're coaching with or in what industry. And I now do this because sometimes you go, man, the tactical wasn't as good as I thought it would be. And then you go, okay, maybe the contacts or network will serve me more, right? But hopefully that's what you're looking for. Like, save me these bad acquisitions where I spend 50 grand on a property that turns out is not buildable, right? Save me that money.
All that seed money's gone if you make that one mistake.
Yeah, one mistake. And I've had those calls before where it's more of like a cost mentality. And I get it. I get it. But It's like, oh man, that's more expensive than I thought, the coaching. And then I had one guy circle back and he shared with me, he's like, okay, well, now it doesn't sound so expensive. He said, I just spent, $7,000 on like marketing and totally mispriced my tried to start with blind offers and tried to blind offer at a county level where there's just all this variance, like didn't understand, probably needed to be at the subdivision level, not even at the zip code level, but did a bunch of county-wide marketing. And once you hit send on that whole campaign, you can't reel it back, right? So then it's kind of like, okay, that was a wasted cost. I guess if I put that on coaching, but I get it. I understand these are expenses. It's an investment, right, in yourself, and not everybody has the resources. Or if you do, it's hard to kind of move from this like clenched fist, like let it go, to like understanding like what you guys are, where you're like, hey, you can kind of fast track me and you can save me from these mistakes. So I think you can't basically enter coaching reluctantly or feeling like concerned. Like if you don't feel good about making that investment in yourself, you're probably not ready for it, right?
Yeah, one of the things you told me in that call, I remember, and I mean, we talked about a few things. I remember talking about goals. I remember very little, but I remember talking about goals, and I remember you said the one ask you have, or the most important ask you have, is that any coaching students in your community trust the process. Don't, like you said, don't enter it reluctantly. Don't hear what your coach has to say based on your situation, because that's what you're paying for with the one-on-one. You're paying for a coach to look at your exact situation, your exact goals, how much reach do you have? What skills do you come to the table with? I mean, it's very curated to just you specifically. And then if you sit there and get all this valuable advice, coaching, but then you spend 2 weeks before your meetings going rogue and doing something else because you didn't trust the process. I mean, essentially you're wasting your money at that point. But you told me, hey, I want you to trust the process. I want you to stick with what your coach tells you to do. And I'd say that was probably the key ingredient in my coaching to success. There was definitely times had me doing things that felt weird and they felt uncomfortable. And there was times that I didn't want to do them, but I just remember you saying that and remember making that agreement with you and telling myself that I've committed to this. Like there's no getting out. I got to trust the process. So anytime I wanted to not trust the process or get away from it, I just sort of forced myself.
And there's a couple of reasons that it's just really important. One, it's like, hey, if grandma gives you her recipe, right? Like you can't take that recipe that's been passed down from generations. Then you go to the store and you're like, hey, the Kirkland brand chocolate chips are cheaper than the Nestle ones, right? I'm going to pick them up. It's like, no, the recipe said Nestle chocolate chip, So anyway, when we start to substitute ingredients and we switch up the process, we don't know that the outcome is going to be the same, right? So it's like hard for your coach or for me or for it to go back and go, what went wrong when we start to find, well, I did this a little differently because over here I heard on this podcast or from this person, they do it that way. So it's kind of like when you mix and marry things. Honestly, there's a lot of great educators out there, and if you follow specifically their method, it's probably going to work. But the problem becomes when you start to like try to take pieces from each and you end up with something that doesn't work. So that was like, stick with the process. It's also kind of like telling the kids, show your work, right? With math, it's like, if you get the wrong math answer, I have no idea where you went wrong. When we're trying to tell the kids, like, I know it's annoying, but here's why your teacher wants you to show your homework, or show your work, how you got there, so they can go back to that step and go, oh, right, here's where we went wrong. All right. So that it just it just really helps. And that's where like later I go, well, it wasn't my process that didn't work. You didn't follow my process, right? It's a lot easier if you come to me and say, hey, your process isn't working. I can then go, okay, let's see why. Is it not working because of the market or something with your marketing piece, or who's answering the phones, or how long we're getting back? We can dig into why it's not working, right? But if I have to kind of figure out what you Frankenstein together and it doesn't look anything like what we've been able to replicate or duplicate. And that's kind of when I built the course, for me, it was more like it was an SOP. Like I said, if we were trying to franchise our land company, that's kind of what the course should be. It's almost like, like the SOP for our business model. So have people go, well, hey, like there's a lot of deals that can be done at the 10 to 20 range. And I'm like, well, I'm not saying there's not. But that's what the course is. And the boss method, the program is that it's our business model in like course format and coaching format. So heck yeah, you can make a lot of modifications to fit what you're doing as far as the values you go after. But that's honestly what it is. And so we're just like teaching what works for us. but you got to follow it. And I tell people, if you have traction, if it works for you, let's make some money together using what I know work. And then you can get creative, you can get cute and do whatever you want year 2 or year 3 when you're at that level. Heck, take one of my methods and build on it, or do something even better and more profitable. But to start out, let's stick with what we all know works. And then you can kind of get creative later, right?
100%. Yeah. And to your point there, you said something important. You said, if you start taking little bits of ingredients from different communities and sort of make your own cocktail, you're wasting your money on coaching, because you could do that for free. Right now, you can listen to all the different shows that are out there.
Piece things together.
Yeah, you can make your own thing and it's free. So try it for free. I mean, you got marketing. Try it for free if you want to do that. If you want to do coaching, get your money's worth. Get every penny back by sticking to that process, because you're paying for that process. You're paying for that path that's already considered all these variables.
And that's where, so year one, that was the main thing when we talked and kind of were setting a plan for you. It was like, okay, with the firefighting job, like with the job you have and how demanding it is, and the what'd you say, obligatory or whatever overtime, not the forced overtime,
mandatory overtime,
the mandatory overtime, right? Like it was like, okay, I need to build the business in such a way where I'm the least involved with the least amount of input or man hours as possible. And I kind of told you then, okay, then we're probably gonna have to go with direct mail, because some of these other channels, texting, cold calling, they require quicker responses, and you need to be kind of put you on your heels, and you're not available to respond. So we went with direct mail, which is the most expensive marketing channel, but there's the most grace on getting back to sellers, and you can kind of take your time working through them. But I said, but to get the goals you want and to get the responses we need, we're going to have to do X amount of marketing, which I know felt like a lot. But again, you're like, okay, if that's what you say we need to do a month, that's what we'll do. Now I'll let you kind of fast forward and tell people, what did year one look like? Because you trusted the process. You did your part. 12 months into it, year one, kind of share with everybody your kind of some of your deals and where you were at after a full year.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to, I think, pick the most pertinent points. Year one is a bit of a blur. I felt like it was kind of chaos, it was organized, but when everything's new, I mean, literally everything I was doing was brand new. So not only had I never stepped into this sort of entrepreneurial space, I'd only ever had a W-2. I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs either. So that mindset is not, within my family even. So everything was the first time doing it. So it felt at times a little overwhelming, but it also made everything a bit of a blur. So yeah, I mean, we did direct mail. I still use direct mail today. And, to your point, it works great for the business that I was trying to build. So I'm still a firm direct mail only guy. Yeah. We got mail out. I think we started coaching August. We got mail out by very beginning of sometime in September, because I remember early October starting to have the leads come in. And a lot of it was like the people calling and leaving me voicemails and like cussing at me and getting mad, because we were doing blind offers at first. So I had to get through all that, but we had a pretty good lead flow, and we bought our first property. I want to say it might've been December. It could have been January. I don't remember, but there was a solid like 3-4 months of sending mail, spending money on mail before we even bought the first property. And so, anyone's got the expectation that within a few months they're going to make 50 grand. It's just almost not even possible unless you're going to like assign a contract. But if you're brand new, that's probably a bit of a reach. So, there's this life cycle of a deal where you got to send mail for a few months. You got to get it under contract. You got a month or two to close. Then you're going to have it listed for a month or two. And then you got another month or two to close on the dispositions. And so you're really talking like 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, that traditional buy outright and resell is like a 6 to 9 month process. I mean, totally. If people are looking for quick money, it's assignments and double closes, which, there's a little bit of learning curve or nuances with those themselves. But the traditional buy outright and resell, you're spot on 6 to 9 months.
Yeah.
Before we're cashing checks.
Exactly. And that was it. So we bought it December, January, somewhere in there, and we sold our first deal. So we started picking up one, and then we picked up another one like within a month. And I was in several different counties, a couple different states even, at the advice of Buck. And we sold our first one in March, if I'm remembering right. So that one actually went pretty quick, the first one. And I don't remember the exact details about it, there was some stuff to deal with. We had found out it was like a 2-acre lot in Washington State, which anyone listening have at Washington. I'm done with it. It's kind of a difficult state to operate in, so I'm not there anymore. But we did get 1 or 2 deals out of it. The first one, we dealt with some issues. The guy during the perk test, they realized he had been burying a bunch of concrete out there over the years, and we had to get a survey on it because he didn't do that right early on. So, it wasn't like we just bought it and had the title and then went and sold it and laughed all the way to the bank. Right away, the first actual deal that we sold was, it wasn't without some struggle. We had to really, continue in our due diligence to reevaluate, is this still a good idea or do we pull the plug? And even though we had bought a perk test for, $1,600, I still had to ask myself, that's fine. Do I just lose the $1,600 or do I buy a property for, what did I buy it for? I think I bought it for $20,000 and we ended up selling it. If I remember right, it was in the 60s.
Yeah.
And so we netted I just remember we netted 36 on our first sell. And so happened.
That's such a sweet spot too. That's kind of my favorite range. You can't get them all for 20 and sell for 60, but that 20 to 25 and then selling for 45 to 60. There's a lot of deals out there at that range. So that's a nice payday, definitely proof of concept, right?
Totally. And it wasn't enough to get us into the black where you still had spent more on the business than we had made on the 36. But it was kind of wild that we'd spent money, month after month after month. And then we get this we do one deal. It finally sells, no problem. Sold smoothly. And we get one deal. And not only did we move, we didn't just move a little closer to being out of debt. We took a massive chunk out of our startup costs. And we were actually really close to being profitable. So then, I'm trying to remember them all, but we sort of, we stuck to the land boss method. So it was anything under 40,000 was a hard cutoff. We just didn't touch it because, again, with my job and being a family man, and I'm pretty involved in my church, I try to have a hobby or two, as an adult that I can still have an outlet for.
You can't do 60 transactions making $2,000 a piece.
Exactly. Right. And it just wouldn't have been worth it. And it wouldn't have worked for me. And that would have probably made me leave land. And so, we passed on a lot of deals, because we were sort of casting a wider net. Yeah. We weren't at the point where we could narrow down yet. So we got a lot of things that we just ended up realizing weren't really a good fit. And so we didn't buy them. But the next good one that we had was one that we picked up for, I want to say, originally $94,000, and we were under contract. It was 3 lots in a subdivision that hadn't been built on, and they were larger. They were 6 acres each. 4 to 6 acres were the first 2. The second one was 11 acres. We ended up buying it for 54 because we had a lot of perk issues, soil issues. I sort of chased the issues and really dug in to figure out can these be solved? Yeah. And so we ended up buying those from a realty company actually that had bought them years ago and didn't want them because of the perk issues. We got them all laid out with some special engineered systems, knowing that would cost more, for the end buyer. And we got them down from it was 90 something, 92 or 94, down to, it was 54 or 56. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And so we got them way down because we told them, hey, that's what it was. I'm sorry. It was 6 lots that we combined to solve the perk issues. So we ended up with 3 listings. So we bought 6 lots.
You had to merge them.
Sold. Yep. So I had to sell them as 3 buildable lots. And we sold all of them. Crazy enough, we sold all of them within a week. And they all sold to people that lived right in that area. I have a great realtor. She's working with me on a project right now. So that realtor was a great find. And we sold all of them, total $114,000. And so we moved them quick. So at that point, I'm doing backflips. I remember my mom was in town visiting. And so my wife and I and the boys, we took my mom out for dinner, and I was like, margaritas are on me. We're going to celebrate, we're finally going to be in the black. We're not in debt anymore. Yeah. And so that was a great one. But actually right in that same time, and this is right around when I met you in Colorado for the Supercars event. It was the days leading up to that event, we were getting wire after wire. We had started buying all these properties, and then they were selling one after the other.
Are you suffering from small deal syndrome? Struggling to close the big ones? You're not alone. Many investors feel inadequate when stepping up to larger deals, but there's hope for you. Small deal syndrome affects countless land investors, leaving them stuck fishing for minnows in a red ocean. Instead, imagine reeling in the big fish in Travis's blue ocean of big land deals. Introducing Land Boss Coaching, the ultimate solution for land investors ready to achieve big results. Our program helps you overcome hesitation, fear, and limiting beliefs so you can step up to the big leagues with confidence. With Land Boss Coaching, you'll learn to tackle bigger deals confidently. No pills or gimmicks, just proven strategies to help you perform at a higher level. Whether you thrive in a group setting or prefer personalized guidance, Travis King is here to help you unlock the untapped goldmine of flipping big land deals as a blue ocean investor. It's time to make your move. Leave small deal syndrome behind and perform like the land boss you were meant to be. Don't let another small deal leave you or your partner disappointed. Visit travisking.com today to explore our group coaching program or inquire about one-on-one coaching. Remember, the path to bigger deals and greater success is just a click away. Visit travisking.com and start your transformation today.
Best deal to date was truly like a land boss approach. It was 9 acres and in sort of my sweet spot county, and road frontage on 2 sides, sort of an L-shaped. And we bought it for, original contract was $125. Got him down to 110 because we had some perk issues again. I thought, we'll see if we can renegotiate.
Yeah.
Market value was $300,000. And so we picked it up for 110. We listed it for 289 with the soil all worked out for 2 building sites. We did not choose to subdivide because I was burning through cash, and I figured fast nickel is better than a slow dime, they say. And so we decided to list it for 290, and we sold it in less than 8 hours. To somebody for full asking price. And we close quick because one of the things that we do is we do as much due diligence as we can on the acquisition side, so that when we list it, my goal is always to have the best listing within like 50 miles. Everybody's going to see the listing that says buildable lot outside of this city, buyer to do their own due diligence.
You handle, essentially, you anticipate all those objections the buyer's going to have, or the things that make them say, hey, I need a 60-day like due diligence or 90-day on my end. If you solve for all those on the buy side, the acquisition side, it reduces days on market, and it reduces like, you don't have to do a 30-day close if title or attorney can close in 2 or 3 weeks. On the sell side, you leave nothing for them to,
that's exactly
no friction,
it.
no objections. Yeah.
It's a twofold return on your investment in that due diligence. Like you said, little hinges, swinging big doors, that's one of them. It reduces the on-market time. It also drastically reduces the closing disposition due diligence time. So we closed that one out.
What was the net?
Yeah, the net on that
deal.
The net on that one was our best to date. We're actually closing on buying a property today that should be much bigger than this. So we're hoping to have a better, all-time best. But the net on that was $149,500 to us.
$149,500. So at that point, it's way past margaritas, right? I mean, that's where you.
That one was a watch, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it better be a diamond bracelet or necklace or something in there for wifey with that size deal, man.
Right, exactly.
It's a big check. It's an inbound wire, but I would think it's also like. It's an epiphany. And it's an understanding that, wow, if I can pull this off at this point, this isn't the ceiling, right? Like the potential. Yes. Talk to me about that. Did you feel that, or were you just so focused on the inbound wire amount you weren't thinking that yet? That was for me. What happened with me was like, oh my goodness, if I can pull this off at this level, what is possible?
Yeah, no, I definitely had those feelings. Two things. So the first is, before we leave that deal, just for anyone listening, it was not, again, it wasn't a deal where we just simply made an offer, bought it, relisted it. There was it was in a family trust. There was 9 signatures we needed to get. I mean, that was emotional whiplash. It was back and forth. We lost the deal. We got it back. We lost it. We got it back. Probably like 5 or 6 times. So there was difficulty in that. So there's always going to be things you got to deal with, and you learn how to deal with them. But to your question about the feelings that you get when you get that kind of wire. Yeah, I thought I was going to be a millionaire before I was, before I turned 36. I was just like, you can't, there's no stopping us now. And what is possible, right, is what you start thinking. And we can talk about it later, some other things that I think we both want to talk about, but that sort of get you, to correct your mindset a little bit and shake you a bit. But I thought that, that wasn't the hardest thing I've ever done. It was getting the job I have now it was difficult. Well, it was extremely competitive. This was easier.
The work you've got to put in, that's for me where it changes everything. When you look at a deal like that and you go like, that's a year, you know what I mean? Like, or whatever. It could be more.
And
right?
That was a while. Yeah. Somebody at when I got that wire, I was with some land investors and someone said like, is that more than you make in your day job?
Yeah.
And I was like, that's my entire year's salary.
Yeah.
And it was actually just slightly above it.
And that's where you have such a surge, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it could do two things to you. You know, it can do some negative things to you, but it can also give you that catalyst to keep going, because I had heard people for so many years on land podcasts talking about their proof of concept that they got, you know, eventually leaving their W-2 and doing all these amazing things for their family because of land. And so I guess I already believed it, but to get your own proof of concept, there's no other feeling in the world. And one investor told me when I got that deal, he said the fact that it was, you know, a little more than I make in an entire year at work. He said, those are the deals that break your brain. And it's true. He's true. It breaks your brain, but I think of it more as like, it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
You start to realize like, whoa. As an operator, what was my hourly rate for that deal?
Yeah.
It's like 20,000 an hour or 10 to 20 grand an hour. Yeah. That's insanity. So then you start to look around you and you just see the world differently, like the world of finance. It's a real paradigm shift. Yeah.
No, it really is. That's and we'll segue into that here in a second. But I think that's important. I actually think it's better that wasn't your first deal. Although there was some hair on it and you had to like drag it across the finish line. I think it's good for you that wasn't the first deal. That the first one was a repeatable type deal, because sometimes when that first deal is like an exception, that's like becomes our frame of reference, like our baseline. And then, you know what I mean? And then all the other deals, you almost turn your nose up at these deals that you shouldn't. So I think that's good for you to have kind of grown into that, right? Because then you understand like, hey, there might only be one of those a year, okay? Or one every 6 months. And then there's a lot of there might be more opportunity at the buy for 25, sell for 60 type thing along the way. So I think knowing that, because I think sometimes, you know, people, it's easy to jump on the podcast and who wants to talk about their average deal? Like, hey, my median deal is this, right? Like, that's not exciting, but that's like the reality that people should understand is, like not every deal is 149 grand net profit, right? There's a lot of marketing expense in a year of work that had to go in to get to that point.
Oh, you could take that out of that net too. So don't forget that you got to create that deal. So that was the net for the deal. Yeah. But you know, there was 6 months of marketing, you're right, leading up to it. So
yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So year one, what'd you kind of finish the year at for revenue?
Yeah. So what I'll tell you is our 2024 numbers, because we spent fall of 23 just sending mail. Yeah. And when we did our taxes, it was all just a loss, right? It was all, we spent money, didn't make any money. So January to December 2024, final numbers, I just did a P&L for my tax guy from our bookkeeper, and it was like just over 195,000 before tax. So we're going to pay tax on that. But so I guess the tax bill, we're sitting right around 150,000.
That's after that's subtracting out all the expenses.
Oh yeah. Revenue was really high. It was like six something. Yep. But remember, we had fall, which was, you know, multi 5-figure of investment. Yeah. Plus, we ended up reimbursing ourselves in 2024. Once we had money, we reimbursed ourselves for the coaching that we paid for. And so we had some owner contributions that had to be given back. And so the money had to move around. Revenue, 6. And then we ended up sitting just right about 200,000.
Excellent. Not a bad first year. Not a bad year.
Not at all. And still, what's crazy to me is an insane profit margin for a business. So I've never started a business. Getting into this, I didn't know anything about business, but man, an acceptable profit margin is like 8 to 12% is like great in a lot of industries. And to be a land investor and have a profit margin of 20 to 50% is unheard of. I know our bookkeeper, our CFO that we hired, like everybody that we interact, realtors, everybody is constantly like blown away by the spread that still exists within land.
That's just it. The return on however you're going to measure it, whether some people ROI, but when you're doing bigger deals, ROI is not the best like way to measure it, but like return on ad spend, return on marketing spend is kind of the best way to look at it. Because to me, you get to a point where you're usually not operating with your own money. You know what I mean? Because that's where really like if you're just spending dollars on marketing and then either working with a private lender or something for the capital piece, or like I know we'll talk, you're kind of syndicating, pull it, whatever, wherever the money's coming from. If you can just dedicate your money to marketing, right? And whether you're self-funding or bringing outside money, the return on marketing spend is insane. Like even when I go on some podcasts outside of land, like I'll cut my ROAS in half, like just because I know they won't believe me. So I literally might like cut it in half and give them that number just because I don't want to
just so you don't shock them too bad.
Yeah, like honestly,
yeah.
But the returns are awesome. But the true prize, this is something we were talking about kind of offline, is the mindset shift and the growth as an entrepreneur that happens along the way. That's kind of what I tell people is I feel like the bank account's not hurting. It's not bad, but the true prize is like the growth along the journey, the growth along the way, the mindset expansion along the way, the confidence like that comes from this kind of a byproduct of the goal being like a dollar amount, right? Usually. But I really, really believe the mindset shifts and the growth, the personal self-development and growth that occurs is the prize, in my opinion. You and I were visiting about that a little bit. So I'd kind of like to move from land to talk to more about that, because you, like you said, I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs. I didn't either. You'd started several things and put in that first 6 months and then switched to the next shiny object. I did the same thing, for about a decade, right? But then when you find something and you treat it like a business and you put in the work to build it, and then you start to like see the rewards. There's a lot of ups and downs, right? Sometimes we call it growth, but there's also like a lot of disappointments, a lot of self-doubt, whole bunch of things along the way. I want to talk to you about that imposter syndrome and self-sabotage, or something you said you wanted to touch on. Why don't we pull on that thread for a minute?
Yeah, everything you said is exactly true. This business but entrepreneurship in general it'll build you up and it will absolutely destroy you. And it just does that over and over and over. And I think that the people that survive it are the people that thrive on solving problems. That's why, all of us are entrepreneurs, is because we want to solve problems. And so, as long as you got the right mindset, you'll take on those problems one at a time and you'll continue to grow. But growth will, it'll look like this. It's not a straight line. It undulates and you do take, 3 steps forward, 1 step back. Yeah. Just how it works. But yeah, so a little bit of a story. So some things that I think that we don't talk about a lot in this industry, and I sort of have a hunch that a lot of people getting into land are probably getting into it because they're like me. They're an average Joe. Maybe they've got a blue collar job like I do. And land is very accessible. It's something that you can get into. That the barrier of entry is not very high compared to a lot of other businesses. And you can be profitable in your first year. That's incredible. I never really realized how incredible that was till I started talking to other entrepreneurs in other spaces and realized that it takes 3 to 5 years to become profitable with a 10% profit margin. And so that being said, I think that, and this is purely anecdotal, but in the little time I've spent around the industry, I think attrition is high. Yeah. A lot of people get into it. They send mail. They send some type of marketing. They don't make money in a few months and they get out. That's because a lot of sellers
6 to 12 are kind of what I see. That's what I see. People who either come in with not enough money for marketing, or they don't have commitment or stick to itness. It's kind of like, hey, if I don't hit a home run in the first couple months, I'm on to the next thing. I would agree. Yeah. And I really feel that first year is where most of that is. And most of it is like months 6 to 12 from my vantage.
Yeah, that makes sense to me because in those months, and I'm going to talk about this now, months 6 to 12 were the hardest months for me on this journey. And it even got to the point where I was thinking about just shutting down the land business, which sounds crazy to think.
Right?
Yeah, more than once. Oh yeah, more than once. I went back and forth. And it sounds crazy to talk about those deals we just did and that was the first 8 months that I was in business. And then to say, 3-4 months after that, or 5 months after that, you were thinking of shutting it down. Like, what's wrong with this guy? So yeah, quick story. So you and I met I think the only time we've met in person was at the Supercars event in last June of Colorado, 24. Yeah. Yep. Great event. Kind of set the bar a little high, I think, because the first event I went to. And so the other one I went to was in Dallas. It was Ajay's event. Both of them just loaded panels. Great events, but they set the bar kind of high. So it's going to be hard if I go to an event that's subpar to that. So I walked into that event on Friday. Thursday, I had gotten like 2 wires. I was running from the Airbnb to the UPS store, to get things notarized, get things in the mail back to the title attorney, this and that. Sort of scrambling to get everything done before the event started. And I the day before, the Thursday, I had become profitable in the business by $200,000. So we went from being in debt to being in the black by $200,000.
Yeah.
And that's what was sitting in the business after expenses and everything. And so that was 8 months in. June was right about 8 months in from the time I consider us actually starting, like sending the mail, writing the first check and starting. And here's the thing. I walked into that land conference after closing my biggest deal, that $149,000 was also part of that, expecting to feel like I had made it. You visualize your success and you see it in the future, and you just kind of keep telling yourself that once you get to that point, I think we all pick points in the future and we decide, once I get to that point, I'm not going to have as much stress. I'm going to feel much better. I'm going to have this badge that says I'm a land investor, that I'm successful, and everything in my life is going to be aligned, and it's just going to be right. And instead, it only took like the first day of hearing some really amazing talks in that conference for me to feel like a complete nobody. Like really, like I just didn't even belong in the space. And so I talk about emotional whiplash, and this happens again and again in entrepreneurship. I went from like this amazing high to just absolutely crashing down and feeling like awkward, feeling like in my conversations and trying to network for the first time, feeling like I didn't even have anything worth talking about. I was just like, what do I tell them? I flipped land and made money. Like everybody here's 120 people, I think, went that all do that thing. And so it just felt like this thing that for me was like an amazing success and huge progress, all of a sudden shrank so much. And it really was a big wake up call. And what it made me realize is that I think it's something that most new entrepreneurs don't expect. And again, I think the space is full of people that are new entrepreneurs. So there's people that come from other ventures, sure, but I just get the impression that there's maybe not the majority, but at least a lot of people in land that this is their first step outside of the day job. And one thing I realized was that no amount of success is ever going to make you feel like you've arrived, if you would.
Right.
Unless you reframe your mindset. And that's kind of the biggest thing. And that, to me, that's the one thing that people just don't warn you about how entrepreneurship, especially when you're transitioning from the day job, it's more than just an operational shift or a financial shift. A big part of it is a psychological shift.
Yeah.
It's the way you handle that side of it.
The biggest part of it, and like you said, you have some of those, like, as you're being introspective, you're thinking about this. At first is that kind of that feeling like you go, well, boy, like, relative to these other people, my success compared to my W-2 last year's salary, I was feeling really good. But now when I compare against this, I don't feel so great about myself. Like right there is like, you eventually arrive at the point like, okay, well, that's comparison. That's how comparison works. It's not really healthy, right? So it's not really like healthy. And the other thing is you go, well, if you're the guy in the room that's making the most, right, of everybody there, you go, it's time to move to a new room. Like, you know what I mean? So you you'll kind of realize this at every table. I'll share a story because this is like a good example. Okay. I'm at my son's baseball game. Okay. And I'm I got to pace, man, because he pitches, right. And it stresses me out. So like I'm pacing up and down. I'm by like way out, on the fence line by first base. And a couple other dads out there talking, and I hear these guys. And these guys are kind of going back and forth. They're both in sales of some sort, and they're kind of just bragging out loud to each other about how much they each made. You know what I mean? And like, and one of them's like, "Oh, dude, I crushed it. This month made 20 grand," and the other guy's like, "Oh, I got 30, right?" And they're bragging to each other about like making, one made 20 something, the other made 30, and I'm kind of like just laughing in my head because I'm like, that month I did 124,000 that month, right? So I'm kind of like laughing, in my head. And then I look over and there's a guy on our team. Anyway, a dad, he sold his software company for $1 billion.
Cool.
Like billion with a B, So like I'm looking at these guys.
Nobody else's numbers matter.
I'm kind of looking at these guys chuckling, and then thinking of my month. And then I look over and sitting in a folding chair is the guy that sold this company for $1 billion. So I go, like, there's levels, you know what I mean? And you're never, and same thing with him. When he walks into a room, there's guys that are way above him. So it's, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're never that guy. They're going to be one richest, one most successful person. So it's all about like going, all right, compare Jon now to Jon 8 months ago, or Jon now to Jon a year ago. And that's where I think like you find happiness in your growth, and you're not like comparing against other people, because that's even like, I mean, I've coached people who have larger teams and do more revenue than my land business. Now, that doesn't mean I can't build that, but for me, I understand there's a cost. There's an opportunity cost. I would have to manage more employees. It would require more time of me to be involved in the business, which means I'm not at that baseball game. I'm not watching that game because I probably got to work or man. So for me, like we have it right where we want it. And there's kind of this like point of diminishing returns if we scale any bigger, where, like you said, more money, more whatever, it's not going to make me happy, right? But I think you're right. You along that journey, though, you have those moments where you do that. You're feeling good, and then you look over and go, oh, but what about him? Right? And as soon as you kill that, and you just kind of compare it to where you were a year ago, it's a lot healthier, on your entrepreneurial journey, I think, to compare yourself today to yesterday versus compare yourself to somebody else.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Teddy Roosevelt said, and maybe he wasn't the first to say this, but he gets credited with it. But he said, comparison is the thief of joy. And I'd heard that years ago, and it always stuck with me. And what's funny is, to what you're saying, I always thought of that as, don't compare yourself to people that are ahead of you, because then it'll make you discontent, and morally we know that's not right. I mean, there's proverbs in the Bible about that. That's an age old thing, but it really goes both ways. Like you're saying, I mean, you can look at someone that's behind you, and that can inflate you. You can look at someone that's ahead of you, and that can shrink you. Right. Instead, you need to just realize that you are where you are, and you were somewhere else a year ago. And I think that's really the remedy. You already brought it up, but that's really the remedy. Is if I had gone into that conference and heard those talks and just thought to myself, look at all these amazing connections that I can make, and heard those talks and thought, this is a great opportunity to plan for the future. Is one of these things in my 5-year goal. There's joy in that. But instead, I subconsciously use those people's success as proof that I didn't belong in the room.
Yeah.
And so I unnecessarily just destroyed my morale. I let joy be taken away from me. And what I should have done was really just compared myself to where I was a year ago. And a year ago, I was probably about to make a call to you to say, hey, I really want to be a land investor. I'd love to get into this space. And there's huge progress from that call that we had to when I met you in person, which was about a 12-month period, like massive progress. And there was a bunch of success involved. But it's funny how, as human beings, like that wasn't even in my mind. It was just that, well, I'm not where they are. Therefore, I don't even belong in the room. And so, I think it's everything's perspective. But that's one thing as an entrepreneur you're going to realize, is that people are going to throw numbers out all the time. They're going to talk about deals. They're going to talk about ventures. And you just got to remember that you got to you're in your lane and they're in theirs. And, one day you might be driving side by side, but it's okay that there's people driving ahead of you. There's people driving behind you. You got to track your own progress. And that's really the only way, I think, to grow, because when you know your own progress, when you know where you've come from, you can, I think, the most accurately decide where you want to go, because you know what's realistic for you. If you set somebody else's finish line as your goal, you constantly do that, you're just going to be chasing things that might not be feasible or even realistic for you.
Yeah, and that's just it. It's like, for you, that's what I'll tell people, like, what is success to you? Like, and to some people that might be like $1 million in the bank, and to other people it might be like time. Like, I'd love to have an extra 10 or 15 hours a week. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be time rich. Others, it's like, I just want the flexibility. Like for me, it was like more replace the income. It wasn't even like, I want to get rich. It was like, man, I want to be time rich. I want to be able to be present with my family. I want to be able to go on vacations. I want to not have anybody control my schedule. So those are really like more of like, that's what success looked like for me. And I think that was helpful, like knowing what success would look like, or along the way, you kind of go, okay, if it's revenue, man, you're always going to set new revenue benchmarks and go up, up, and up. The goalposts.
There's always the billionaire.
You'll never get there. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, so I think that's why it's like going, hey, what would make you happy? What's success to you personally? Because it's different and it changes based on the age, where you're at in life, what age you're at, where you're at. If you're married, if you're single, if you have kids, how many kids, like all of these things change based on where you're at in life, the importance. So I think the main thing is go build a business you love, and a business you want to own, and a business that serves you, not like you don't build somebody else's business, right? Like a huge team, it sounds like a nightmare to me. And I've ran them. Like I was operations director. I've managed lots of people, and I prefer very high revenue per head count per employee. So my metrics are more like how much revenue per head count, per employee can we get versus like, hey, my org chart is this big. And that's, different goals, right? So I think kind of defining those early on, like, hey, what do I want to do and what would make me happy? It helps you know that, but the things that happen along the way, like even you get there and you replace the income, something you're ecstatic for a minute, right? But do you agree with me that you feel like after you've done it, it's not, I don't know if the word's desensitized, but it's kind of like you wish you could bottle those feelings of those first couple deals because of how excited you are. And then as it becomes more of a business and more transactional, it's tough to experience that feeling again, right? Once it becomes business as usual.
Oh,
I know
100%,
that's a first world problem. That's right.
Yeah, I know, right? We talk about these things. Yeah, talk about perspective. It's I agree wholeheartedly, 100%. And it's the dopamine fix. Everybody thought for so long. Something I was reading about recently is everybody thought for so long that dopamine was like the pleasure neurotransmitter. It was a pleasure hormone. And, good things bring you dopamine. And what research is showing is that dopamine is actually, it's the chemical of desire. It's like when you have the anticipation of getting to a certain point, it gives you that dopamine fix. And then when you get there, what happens is you get to that point and the dopamine takes a second to sort of taper off and stop producing. And so you ride this nice crest, like when you get that big wire and you're still getting that dopamine dump. But once you arrive, if you would, I keep using that term, once you arrive at that success, what they find is dopamine's done. It's done its job and it leaves. And then you're left with these other feelings and other hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine that get dumped into your body of, well, what do I do now? Right? What happens now? And that's where the imposter syndrome comes from, is that feeling of well, you start to panic and you start to have weird feelings like the ones I had. Turns out, I had to start doing like a deep dive on these things to try to understand them, to unwind myself, because I got myself into not a very healthy place. But you get these feelings like you doubt your own success. You start to tell yourself things like it was a fluke. And even like you're saying, not everybody gets the 110 to 290 deal. And so, you start saying, well, it was luck. And I found myself panicking. Like so what happened was we bought all these deals and we kept getting good lead after good lead, amongst others. We had to sift through them, but we would buy a property and we'd be under contract and we'd buy another one and be under contract. And we closed on them and got them all listed right away. Well, they all sold right away. And it just so happened with the closing period that they lined up that we closed and listed them and they all sold within like a couple of weeks. And so the closing period was such that we were getting wire after wire after wire, and then all our inventory was gone. So it was a good problem to have because instead of having the inventory, we had the cash. So we were cash heavy and we could go forth and do things with it. But the only thought I had in my head was that was a fluke. It was all luck. It wasn't actually me being a good operator, and I was never going to get a deal again. Like I was sure that I was going to get crummy deals after that. And, the business was just going to eat through all the cash and it just wasn't going to work. And that's part of imposter syndrome too, is like after the dopamine wears off and you're in success, your body starts asking you what's next. And then when you move from a position of knowing things, you're comfortable, right? You step out into the unknown. Well, now what do I do? So now I have a new challenge in front of me. How do I deal with the success, right? More pressure, higher expectations. People are going to expect that I continue down this road. And I repeat this success, but also, like what's next? And then me not believing that I was ever going to get another deal. Because after all, I was a crummy investor and this was all luck.
Yeah.
Now you got the norepi flowing through your blood and it's that fight or flight. And so you start doing all kinds of other crazy things like self-sabotage and this and that we can talk about. But yeah, like I said, this business and entrepreneurship will build you up and then it'll absolutely trash you. And then from the ashes, you got to come, like the Phoenix, you got to rise and you got to take on the next challenge. And that's sort of just growth. But I think that if we can understand these things from a basic like human psychology perspective, we can really hedge against a lot of these things. And we can actually, when the stuff comes along, we can process it and make decisions that help us grow through it rather than just sit like I did for a while and become stagnant and let it just sort of trash me and, fight within my own head.
Well, it's normal and you experience more of it early on, right? And it really is like you're like forging your armor. Like you really are. You're building armor. At first, you got a very, very paper thin armor on you. And you start your journey, and kind of as that armor becomes thicker, right? And you mentally become stronger, and you've experienced more. You had more things fall through, more deals die. Like, you know what I mean? It becomes that, like, that uncertainty becomes, like, living in a state of uncertainty becomes a little bit more familiar, right? And so you're not freaked out by it. But yeah, that happens, and more of it early on, but at every level, even like every new business we've started, or as you try to add a zero each time you move up, right? You're going to have some of that. So I just think that's very real. That's very human. So I appreciate you sharing it, because people don't talk about that. I remember having that early on. Same thing was like, did I get lucky? Did I just pick like a good county? Am I going to be able to do this again? I had a point in my career between like year 2.5 and 3 where that happened, man. I fished the holes dry. My first 2 counties were amazing, and I fished them dry. And it took me several months to find a new market, because I didn't have a data-driven approach at the time. And that's what it did to me. Same thing was like, man, like maybe I'm not the genius land acquisitionist I thought I was. I just got lucky with the copycat method. So now I got to go back and figure out a repeatable method that works. But it's crazy that the fear and doubt that like sneak in, and combating that. But I feel like for me personally, it's kind of been like a story of like bend but don't break. You know what I mean? There's a lot of moments where I've had to bend pretty hard, and things have like hurt, financially and emotionally. And like you said, even like humbling moments, but it's more like you just look at it and you go, okay, it's like give up or grow up, right? And there's kind of those defining moments where you go, and a lot of people do, John. A lot of people go, I'm not cut out with it. They say that out loud, like, I'm not cut out for this. Whether it's like internal, you say, I'm not cut out for this, but I'm going to go back to what I know. The W-2 is comfortable. Not fulfilling, but comfortable, and has certainty. And I'm not cut out for this. And it's terrible, because when you say that stuff, like it's just you start believing your own nonsense. So yeah, you can bias, and you can live in your own head. There's a lot that goes on the journey, as we're doing this. That's why when I kind of like, take my own notes long before I thought of writing a book. I'd just take my notes of experiences throughout the year, throughout deals and things I learned. And that's when I was kind of like identifying like, hey, what are the pillars, to like success with this? And when I finally got around to writing the book, I found my notes, and I had written like mindset, and I now call them like usually like levers, right? Like mindset, skill set, capital, connections, and tools. Those are like the 5 things I've defined like as levers or pillars, whatever you want to call them. You got to have all of these, like, all these levers got to be cranked. But mindset by far is the most important one. You got to have skill set to get started. Eventually you need capital, connections. You're going to need the tools. But like, honestly, the recurring one, the most limiting like lever is mindset. If you don't have that one dialed in, it doesn't matter if all the other levers are cranked up. If the mindset's low, it's going to hold you back. Just awesome to hear. Not just that, I feel like in a short period of time, you've already had a lot of self-development growth, not just done some good deals.
Yeah, and that's sort of the realization I've come to in the last couple of months. And so I spent the second half of last year sort of taking this nosedive, mentally and psychologically into this stuff, and dealing with that. And then, just the basic self-sabotage, right? You let that imposter syndrome sort of fester, and then you start to view, in this case, the land business as something that it's negative. And so every time you look at it, you just want to push it further away. And, you start procrastinating on things. You avoid scaling, you pass up good opportunities, or you chase bad opportunities because you're so anxious to like prove that it wasn't luck, that you start doing things that are actually damaging your business. And this was after I was done with coaching, but I felt like the wheels started to sort of come off a bit.
Yeah.
And I started to do things that were a bit self-damaging, both to my own psyche, but also to the business. And I had to sort of take a deep breath and not really take a break. Like, we slowed down a little bit, but we actually saw a slowdown naturally in the market last year, longer listing times. Everybody sort of stopped calling and held on to their properties. I think
like pre-election, we saw a lot of that. I think like, hey, let's wait and see. There was definitely a 5-month plus, maybe even period where there was a lot of that. I'm going to wait and see what happens, right?
People wouldn't commit. Yeah. they took your offer, but they wanted to sit on it, and they say, well, talk to me after the new year or this. I had a lot of those.
Same thing with money, man. Going out there trying to get private money. It was like, hey, I'm just waiting to see what the economy's going to do, how the election affects things. So it's like, everybody was kind of in a holding pattern, which is kind of weird, not just as acquisition, but even like on the disposition side, same thing where I feel like buyers were kind of like, well, it's more, is this a need or a want, right? Well, with land, a lot of the time, if it's not buildable and we're building a house on it right away, it's kind of more of a want, right? So you see that impact on the dispo side too, days on market. As well, I think we're gearing up though for a beautiful run. Maybe a little harder on the acquisition side, but I think the dispo side is going to be incredible. Looking ahead, anyway. So I'm pretty excited, man. It's been 3 years since I've been this excited about the market.
Oh, good. Yeah. Glad to hear it. I know I listened to Seth's got the market updates. I listened to the most recent one. There's a lot of interesting information in there.
Barring any
I'm looking forward to this year too.
Like in their impact, right?
Let's hope none of those again. Yeah.
Well, awesome, Jon. Hey, man, I appreciate your generosity with your time. Thanks for connecting, and I'm congratulations, man, on your early success. And you and I are going to touch base because you're gonna take this to another level.
I hope so. That's the plan.
Complacent. You're content, you're happy, but you're not complacent.
Yeah, we're looking for what's next still. So hey, thanks for having me on, Travis. It's great to be on here with you. Land Boss community has been great. It's really where I got traction and what really pushed me forward into success. So I'm happy to come on and hopefully the listeners find some value in this. And if anyone is in the Pacific Northwest, actually, if I could mention this. Jesse Kwong and I, he's up in Vancouver, BC. We've gotten a Pacific Northwest land meetup started. We've had just a couple of meetups so far, and we really it's pretty casual. We just get together. It rains a lot up here in the winter. It's also cold if it's not raining. So the last few have been going out to dinner, but as the weather gets nicer, we might go out and do stuff outside together and, just meet each other, see who's doing what, who's in the area, talk shop. And, make good connections and create value together. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest, feel free to reach out. Or if you just want to say hi or talk more about anything we've talked about today, Jon, Jon, at newthproperties.com. Send me an email. We'll connect.
All right, Jon. And we'll put in the episode, the show notes. We'll link to your contact info as well. But awesome. There's huge advantage in getting to meet people in the flesh, meet in person. And also there's a lot of times where like you'll find you can joint venture on deals together. Sometimes somebody wants to be the money guy, but not the active operator or vice versa. So, and even if you don't end up doing deals together, just getting to meet people that are like-minded, right? And kind of in this land tribe, right? Not just in real estate investing, but kind of in our tribe, in our niche. I think there's huge value, in doing that. All right. Thanks, Jon.
Operationally and mentally, everything we talked about today. Sorry, just both those things. It helps with the business side. Also is going to help with all the stuff we talked about that you're going to deal with mentally.
You can find yourself
around like-minded people.
You can find yourself behind, and I spent that for a couple of years. I was like just a one-man operation behind a big monitor, being an introvert, but I'll tell people like it's a lot more fun when you make it a team sport
100%.
versus just a solo sport. And that's been my experience anyway. All right. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks, Travis. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for tuning into The King Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Also, don't forget to head over to travisking.com for show notes, resources, bonus content, and more ways to connect with me and the guests that you hear on the show. Remember, greatness is already within you. It's time for you to boss up and claim it. Stop building someone else's empire and start building your own.